Hello, and welcome to the channel. In this video, we'll be discussing the case of Kelly Ann Bates. Kelly was a young teenage girl with her whole life ahead of her. However, after meeting a man more than 3 times her age, this encounter would eventually prove to be fatal. A word of warning: if you're not already familiar with this case, please be aware that some of the details I'll be covering may be upsetting to some viewers. As you may have figured out, this particular case serves as a warning to the dangers of domestic violence. Regardless as to who is carrying out the harm, I think it's important to face issues like this head on, in the hope that it may inspire someone to find the strength to remove themselves from dangerous and potentially life-threatening situations. What I will tell you today should never happen to anyone. I've covered some shocking crimes in the short time since producing content on the channel, and I think this may be the one that sticks with me most. So without further ado, let's begin. Kelly Ann Bates was born in Hattersley, Greater Manchester, on the 18th of May 1978. To parents Margaret and Tommy Bates. Her parents were thrilled to have a baby girl, and they would nurture Kelly to be a kind, thoughtful child who would eventually become more independent as she grew to early adolescence and had aspirations of becoming a teacher. At 14 years old, Kelly had begun babysitting other parents' children to earn herself some extra money, and in 1993, while babysitting one evening, she was introduced to a man who, worried about letting Kelly walk home alone late at night, offered to walk her home. Despite the man being around 30 years Kelly's senior, this didn't bother him. He had no problem with grooming the young 14-year-old into a relationship, one which she would conceal from her parents, telling them that she had a boyfriend, but that he was from school and that his name was Dave Smith. Kelly's parents were pleased for her and wanted to meet the new love of her life, but they wouldn't have the opportunity to meet this individual for 2 years. During this 2-year window, Kelly would go from the fun-loving, happy, outgoing teenager she was to gradually withdrawing herself from her family, isolating herself from her friends, sneaking out of her home late at night, and sometimes not returning for several days at a time. Margaret would say that Dave would often call her home to check whether Kelly was there, seemingly concerned for her safety, when she would disappear for days on end. The image of Kelly's boyfriend being a nice teenage lad would be shattered when one day Margaret and Tommy would meet Dave Smith. When they arrived home, the couple were greeted by Kelly, who told her parents that her boyfriend was an older man, still lying about his age, with Kelly telling the pair that he was actually 32 years old. It was at this moment Dave entered the room. Margaret and Tommy would take an instant dislike to Dave. When later referring to the initial introduction, Margaret would say the following: "This wasn't the man I wanted for my daughter. I vividly recall seeing our bread knife in the kitchen and wanting to pick it up and stab him in the back." She also said that the sight of the man caused the hairs on the back of her neck to stand up. After Kelly left school, she was convinced by Dave to move in with him. But over the next few months, the pair would argue regularly, with Kelly leaving Dave and returning home to her parents, each time sporting bruises and bite marks. When her parents challenged her on her injuries, she would brush them off, attributing these injuries to accidents that she had. Tommy and Margaret would try to reason with Kelly and would repeatedly try to convince her to leave Dave, although he would use their desperation to further turn Kelly against her parents, telling her that they were being interfering and overbearing. Her parents would even contact the police on several occasions to try and intervene, but they were powerless to do anything, as Kelly was 16 at the time and was of legal age of consent in the UK to form mature relationships. It also didn't help that Kelly never reported Dave for domestic abuse of any kind. The tensions between Kelly, Dave, and her parents would come to a head on the 30th of November 1995, when Kelly told her parents that she would be moving out of the family home and into Dave's residence at Furnival Road, Gorton. This time, for good. It would be the last time her parents would ever see their daughter. From this point, the only communication that they would receive from their daughter would be letters and cards, except they could tell that the handwriting on the cards was not Kelly's, but Dave's. The thing about Dave Smith is that this wasn't his real name. His real name was James Patterson Smith. Before I tell you about James, if you're aware of this case, you may have seen this image used when describing James. This appears to be a common error I came across while researching this case, as the man in this image is James Smith, but not the same man. This James Smith was born in 1936 and was the sixth to last person to be executed in a British prison after he murdered Sarah Isabella Cross in her sweet shop on the 4th of May 1962. His execution would take place on the 28th of November that same year, 16 years before Kelly was born. This is James Patterson Smith. James was born in 1948. Little is known about his past, except for the fact that he has an extensive history of violence towards the women in his life. By 1980, James had already been married and divorced, with his marriage ending due to violence on his part. Soon after his divorce, he met 20-year-old Tina Watson, where he was in a relationship with her until 1982. Sources state that he would use Tina as a punching bag throughout their relationship. She would say that at first, he would hit her every now and then, lightly tapping her. But as the violence escalated, so did the frequency. In the end, she would be beaten every day. He would punch her, slap her, and kick her legs, as well as in between them. He would also hit her over the head with an ashtray, and even try to drown her once while she was in the bath. James also abused Tina while she was pregnant with his child. She would eventually escape from the relationship after the drowning attempt, although it wouldn't take James long to find another poor soul. This time, he would target 15-year-old Wendy Mottershead, who he also abused relentlessly. She would also claim that Smith tried drowning her by holding her head down in a kitchen sink. By the time this relationship ended, and he encountered Kellyanne Bates, James was unemployed and living in Furnival Road, Gorton, in Manchester. As described earlier, by the time Kelly had moved in permanently with James, he had her completely under his control. Her brother would visit Furnival Road to make sure Kelly was okay, but James told him she was not at home. A concerned neighbour also demanded to see the young girl, but she was only allowed to see Kelly through an upstairs window. The last time her parents would ever speak to Kelly would be on the 10th of March 1996, where they spoke to her on the phone. Margaret had called to inform her daughter that she had missed a dentist appointment. During this call, Kelly promised to visit her mother the following Sunday for Mother's Day, but when that day came, she never arrived. 37 days after their last conversation, James Smith would leave his home, alone. On the 16th of April 1996, James Smith walked into the local police station near his Gorton home, where he would tell them that Kelly had accidentally drowned in the bath. He said that while Kelly was in the bath, they were having an argument. Kelly accidentally swallowed water, but James explained that she would often pretend to be unconscious, and so he left. But he did say that he had gone back to check on her 2 or 3 times. Upon realizing she had drowned, James claimed to try to resuscitate Kelly, to no avail. However, when police arrived at the home, it quickly became apparent that what happened to Kelly was not a case of accidental drowning. Her naked body was found in the bedroom of their home, and there was also blood found in every room of the home. Kelly's blood. She also had horrific injuries all over her body. Without hesitation, James would be immediately arrested for the murder of Kelly Ann Bates. Kelly's parents were notified of her daughter's passing, and it was Kelly's father, Tommy, who would identify her. A post-mortem examination was carried out on Kelly, and what I'm about to describe may be upsetting to some, so if you want to skip to this part of the video, please feel free to do so. William Lawler, who was the Home Office pathologist at the time, carried out the examination on Kelly. He would find the following: scalding to her buttocks and left leg, burns on her thigh caused by the application of a hot iron, a fractured arm, multiple stab wounds caused by knives, forks and scissors, stab wounds inside her mouth, crush injuries to both hands, mutilation of her ears, nose, eyebrows, mouth, lips, and genitalia, wounds caused by a spade and pruning shears, both eyes gouged out, which he determined took place 5 days to 3 weeks prior to her death, stab wounds to the empty eye sockets, partial scalping, crush injuries to her knees, rendering her unable to walk, and she had also been beaten over the head with a shower head immediately prior to her drowning. He would go on to say that after examining almost 600 homicide victims, he had never come across injuries so extensive. And police also discovered that Kelly had been tied to radiators by her own hair. She had also been starved, losing around 20 kilograms in weight, as well as showing signs that she had not had anything to drink for several days prior to her death. Given the nature and the age of her wounds, it was determined the injuries on Kelly were not the result of a sudden eruption of violence, but rather a sustained period of torture, lasting up to 4 weeks. And yet, despite all the overwhelming evidence, James Patterson Smith still denied murdering Kelly. At the trial, the court would learn of Smith's almost 3-decade campaign of abuse he brought upon the women in his life. He would sensationally continue to deny murdering Kelly, and would outrageously attempt to portray himself as the victim, claiming that Kelly had put him through hell, and would constantly wind him up, as well as mock him over the death of his mother. He would also say that she had a bad habit of hurting herself, with the intention of making himself appear worse to others. When asked about why Kelly's eyes were gouged out, he claimed that she had dared him to do it, saying she challenged him to hurt her, to which he obliged. Unsurprisingly, the jury were buying none of this, and on the 19th of November 1997, just after 1 hour of deliberation, James Patterson Smith was found guilty for the murder of Kelly Ann Bates. Mr. Justice Sachs, the judge presiding over the case, said that this has been a terrible case, a catalogue of depravity by one human being upon another. You are a highly dangerous person. You are an abuser of women, and I intend, so far as it is in my power, that you will abuse no more. He sentenced Smith to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after 20 years. This was also the first time that an entire jury was offered counselling due to the horrific nature of the crime. Understandably, all jury members accepted this offer. To this day, James Patterson Smith remains in prison. This was one of the few cases I've covered which has left me awake at night. James Patterson Smith was a monster, pure and simple. I hope that he never sees the light of day again. One thing that really irked me while researching the case, besides the incorrect image for Smith being used, were the claims that because Kelly was 16, she was an adult. This is simply not true. In the UK, an individual isn't considered legally an adult until they reach 18. Kelly was a child, although because of her age at the time, she was able to legally consent into entering a relationship, as well as move out of her home without the consent of her parents. But this relationship started when she was just 14 years old. Had her parents known the truth much sooner, maybe the circumstances would have been different. That being said, her parents did what they could from a legal point of view. Margaret sadly passed away on the 17th of December 2020 after a long battle with illness. She is survived by her husband Tommy, as well as their 2 sons. She was 65. Thank you for watching the video. If you found this video informative, please consider subscribing to the channel, as well as hitting the notification bell so you never miss an upload. I've also got a playlist of my other true crime videos, which you may want to consider checking out. Until next time, take care, and goodbye. For now.